opposite. They got more freedom and more elevation on one hand, but their respect went the opposite way. It's just simply, folks, it's in the records. If you don't like what I'm saying, take it up with the record books. All right, we'll move on then. And I am getting behind in this class without me meaning to. Greece. All right. Before we move on, I'm thinking of a certain country. I'm talking about now 2018. This country has a really bad economy, and its bad economy has pulled down the nations around it. No, I'm not talking about the United States. Does anyone have any idea what land I might be talking about? That its economy is so bad, it's destroying the land, the economy of the nations that have tried to help it? Anybody know? What's that?
China.
Greece. Greece. Thank you. China, not bad. China has probably the second biggest economy in the world behind the United States. But China's having economic problems now. Actually, everybody is. The United States is too deep in debt. Greece's economy, in the land of Greece, people retire at 51. Folks, we can't afford that. They get 6 weeks vacation every year. Now, the Swiss, about 3 or 4 years ago, put it on a ballot where they'd have up to vacation time from 4 weeks to 6, and the Swiss, being the wise people always thought they are, the Swiss voted against 6 weeks vacation, voted to keep 4. You might say, hey, what's wrong with having 6 weeks vacation? It's too expensive. You're paying people to not work. Now, nothing wrong with taking a little bit of time off. Everybody should. But there's such a thing as too much. In the case of Greece, it's too much. Why do I say this? Because what was going on in Greece back then, I think, has gotten worse and worse and worse until today. Some of these socialistic European countries are pulling the world's economy down, and there's 5 of them called the pigs, yes. Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. Those are the pig nations that are pulling down the rest of the economy. And really, the European Union would be better off to kick those countries out. Instead, there are countries that would do well in it, countries like Great Britain voted to move out, and Germany that might move out next. The Union is doomed if Germany moves out, pure and simple. Germany has been carrying the weight, economic weight of the Union since it was formed. Now, having said that, we're back to the 300 BC. Greece could not unite itself. Now, Greece has spent the last, well, all but the last 200 years conquered by somebody. They were first conquered by the Macedonians, then they were conquered by Rome, then they were subject to the Byzantine Empire, then they were conquered by the Muslims, and finally in 1802, Napoleon Bonaparte, the French, helped them get their freedom from the Muslims. So today they're free. They've been free since 1802, but from the time of Philip of Macedon until 1802, they did not have their independence, and a large part of it is due to the problems they had. Again, I think I blame a lot of it on Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. All right, Philip of Macedon did what the Greeks could not do for themselves. He united them. He conquered Greece, united them. Then he was assassinated. He was was making plans to go to Persia and conquer Persia. And he was during a party, a drunken party, someone rose up and killed him. The rest of the people at the party went in pursuit of the man who killed him, and they killed the assassin, which meant the assassin could not talk. There are persons who have believed that Alexander took a part in it. Here's why. Alexander's mother was not Macedonian. Well, Alexander was the oldest child, so he was heir to the throne until his father Philip married a Macedonian woman and had a son by the Macedonian woman. That meant that Alexander was no longer heir to the throne. So Alexander had reason to want his father killed, and shortly afterward, Alexander killed the baby boy who was born to this Macedonian woman. Anyway, in the case of Alexander, his mother, like I said, already said, was not a Macedonian, true Macedonian, but she was a foreigner. Well, when they married, Philip was taking a different wife almost every year. Every time he conquered a land, he would take one of the princesses. So she was a princess of sorts, Olympias. One day, though, well, actually, the story goes that Philip could not stand her because she had really, really bad breath. And this was in the days before he had Listerine. But then she found out that eating the Alexander plant would help her bad breath, so she started eating the Alexander plant. And supposedly Philip could stand her a little bit better. But then again, Philip one day decided to peek in through a keyhole and look at her bedroom, and he was terrified because he saw a big, large serpent slithering up to her bed. And she was talking to this serpent, whatever. Well, Philip was so upset that he went to the oracle at Delphi to consult with what is the meaning of this. And the oracle at Delphi said, "Honor Zeus with all your might." And he said, "The eye with which you peeked on your wife, you are going to lose sight of in a short time." Shortly after that, Philip went to battle and was hit in the eye, lost the sight of his right eye, and he lived blind in his right eye from that time until the day he died. All right, believe what you will, Philip did not know if Alexander were his son or not, and Alexander eventually came to believe that Philip was not his father, Zeus really was his father. Folk, I mean, I'm telling you the story the way that they told it back then, not the way a modern day teacher would tell it, so I have no apology. Each of you can make up your own mind what you believe about what I'm saying. You've got to understand, though, that of all the military leaders in history, Alexander was the only one who would lead he'd go into battle with his troops behind him, and he would engage the enemy first, all by himself. Then his troops would follow up, and they would engage after he had engaged. And he never lost a battle. Now, he was finally wounded when he got to India, but let's jump ahead of the story. But anyway, Alexander, he took over. The Greeks said, this young man can't handle it. They rose up in rebellion. Alexander went to the city of Thebes, that was the chief military city after Sparta. And Alexander utterly destroyed Thebes, killed every soldier there, and actually killed most of the men and burnt the city with fire. And after that, all the other Greek cities, except for Sparta, lined up. Sparta was neither conquered by Philip nor Alexander. Alexander was too busy to worry about Sparta. He left Sparta alone. But the Greeks did not rebel against Alexander from that day on. Now, Alexander then went on to collect his army, and he crossed the other Hellespont. I mean, he crossed from Greece into what is today Turkey. It was then called Asia Minor, also called Ionia. It has had several names down through the years. But he crossed Hellespont and engaged the Persians and won every time, put the Persian king Darius III on the run. Well, at one point he kept engaged. Darius did not give up. Darius kept fighting. At one point they met at a place which is like bowl-shaped, called Armageddon. Napoleon once looked at the battle site of Armageddon and said, "Wouldn't this be a great place, a dandy place to have a battle?" Here's what's so great about a battle here. Every soldier can see every other. Your generals can see everything that's going on, and there's no room for flanking maneuvers, no room for fakery. It's just heads up, head-to-head combat, and one side is going to win, the other side lose. Again, no room for strategy, just knock it out, bang it out. Now, when Alexander the Great engaged in battle at Armageddon, he put his army to where if he retreated, he'd have to retreat toward Persia, back toward Persia. And in the meantime, he forced the Persians to fight, where if they retreated, they'd have to run towards the land he'd already conquered. So each side, if they lost, was going to have to retreat into enemy territory. Again, no room for side maneuvers, flank maneuvers, head on. Alexander's army won the battle of Armageddon. By the way, the writer of Revelation says the last battle of the world will be fought there. There have been many, many a battle fought there. It's been said that Armageddon is worth 1,000 cities. Very strategic. It's located near where Europe, Asia, and Africa meet. Very, very important. Alexander then went on to conquer Tyre. Tyre was the capital of Phoenicians. Tyre believed that they could treat Alexander any old way, that they couldn't be conquered. They were an island about a mile out in the ocean. Well, Alexander sent some ambassadors, and this is something you don't do. The king of Tyre killed Alexander's ambassadors. Really bad. Alexander said this is going to be avenged, so he had his men dump water, had his men dump dirt to form a causeway, not a bridge, but a causeway between the mainland and the land of Tyre. Once he had a causeway, he built siege engines and machinery, heavy machinery, that could knock down stone walls. They knocked down the stone walls of Tyre, breached the city, went in, and destroyed the city of Tyre, every man they could find. And the city of Tyre has not recovered from Alexander this day. Now Nebuchadnezzar had conquered Tyre earlier. As far as you know, Tyre was only conquered by two kings, Nebuchadnezzar and Alexander. But Alexander completely destroyed it, to where Tyre has not been rebuilt from that day to this. Eventually, King Darius was killed by his own men. Sir Alexander took the title of Great King of the Persians. Alexander went into Egypt. I've got to tell this story. On his way to Egypt, he had to pass through Judea, otherwise known as Israel. So he offered peace to Judea. He said, if you'll worship me as God, we'll get along peacefully. The Jews replied that they couldn't do that, so he said, okay, I'm going to conquer you. But some chief Jewish rabbis went out and met him, and they opened up to the prophet Daniel, and they said, here, 300 years ago, one of our favorite prophets foretold that you would come in, and they foretold you're going to defeat the Persians, which you're still going to do. They also foretold you're going to conquer every bit of the Persian Empire. Alexander was so impressed by this that he exempted the Jews from having to worship him, and the Jews and he then got along from then on. Alexander went on to Egypt, took on the title of Pharaoh, visited the oracle, and the oracle told him that everyone who had assassinated his father was dead. The oracle also told him that don't worry about your father, because Philip was not your father anyway. Your real father is Zeus. I say eventually Alexander conquered the Persian Empire. Copying the ways of his father, he married a Persian woman and had a son. He never paid much attention to the boy, though. And eventually this son was killed after Alexander died. He went to India, and there in India he defeated the Indian army. He met Chandragupta Maurya, whom he took into his army. And we've already talked about Chandragupta Maurya founded the Mauryan dynasty. Alexander wanted to go on. He was looking for the end of the world, and he did not know how far he had to travel to get to the Pacific Ocean. Apparently he was unaware of the Indian subcontinent, the great land of China. But he was looking for the end of the world. But finally, his troops, from the generals to the privates, every one of the men in his army stood up to him and said, no, we're not going farther. There was nothing Alexander could do about that. It was said that Alexander broke down and cried when there were no more worlds to conquer. Alexander started the trip home with his troops, crossed the desert, a very unwise move, but he wound up in Babylon. And there in Babylon he died at the age of 32 after a reign of only 12 years. The rumor has he might have been poisoned. Other rumor has he never recovered from the wound he'd received in India. India possibly had some super weapons. I've talked about the Indian Vimanas and had you read about him. And that might be why that Alexander could be hurt, because India knows, instead of Alexander being wounded by an arrow, some accounts say he might have been wounded by a guided missile. Something really heavy that would have obliterated any ordinary man. Be that as it may, folk, each of you can do your own research on this. Alexander died. His body got as far as Alexandria, a city he himself had founded. He founded a lot of cities and named them after himself or his horse Bucephalus. But there in Alexandria, his body disappeared and has never been found from that day till this. This is a bit of trivia. Don't any of you write it down, but I always throw it in. Alexander died on June the 10th. Nothing important, right? It says this is my birthday. Other than that, it's nothing that important. But he died on the 10th of June, yes. All right. Now, after he died, his empire was split into 4 parts. The one part, I want you to remember, the other 3, there were the Seleucids, with the Ptolemies of Egypt. Ptolemy took over Egypt. Now, Ptolemy was a scientist as well as a general, and Ptolemy set up a view of the universe that was destined to last 1,800 years. Until his view there was the earth is a center, and all the universe goes around the earth every day. And even when they found some facts that would contradict it, Ptolemy's view held sway over mankind's thinking for 1,800 years, in spite of its faults, which shows how wrong then do I think that scientists today are following false theories? Indeed I do. Theories that set them back. But also Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, was a Ptolemy. But anyway, Ptolemy set up in Egypt, and the Egyptians carried on a lot of wars with the Seleucids, but that's part of it. Anyway, the world that followed, Alex, was the Hellenistic world. The word Hellen has to do with Greece. The Hellenistic world, where the Greek culture spread throughout much of the Middle East and the known world. Because especially Alexander believed that Greek culture to be superior to Persian culture. So even though Greece itself was pretty weak at this time, Greek culture was looked on as being the best. And I will say this, Western civilization went downhill, downhill, and downhill under Greek culture. But it appeared to be the right thing at the time. A couple of philosophies came about, the Epicureans and the Stoics. The Epicureans, their favorite saying was, "Let us eat, drink, and make merry, for tomorrow we die." The best thing you get out of life is pleasure. Why have life? Get the most pleasure you can, because it's going to come to an end. Their philosophy became less and less popular as time went on, particularly because it led to a whole lot of wild parties with uncontrolled eating and drinking. And it is known that persons who are drunk, their inhibitions go, and they wind up doing things. And yes, you are responsible for what you do while you're under the influence of drink, strong drink. Don't let anyone lead you to think you're not. But you're responsible for what you do if you drink too much. The Stoics, now, they believe that no virtue is the key to a happy life. A lot of your community leaders were Stoics. But the problem with Stoics, though, they tended to feel unemotional. No emotion, and don't have very many friends. Now, the typical example of Stoic, you ever watched the original Star Trek series? They had a character with pointed ears named Spock. He was very much Stoic. Don't show emotion. Now, the newer Spock that came along later abandoned that philosophy. But the old Spock, original Spock, was don't ever cry, don't ever laugh, don't ever show any kind of emotion, because shows weakness. They believed that you could find out virtue by knowing the will of God, but you had to accept whatever life offered you as the will of God. So if life offered you poverty, accept that. And folk don't believe that, but nevertheless, I'm saying it because it's part of the lesson. But if you find yourself in poverty, find a way to get out. If you find yourself sick, try to find a way to get well. Sometimes it's impossible, but nevertheless, the Stoics said just accept what falls your way as being the will of God, and don't question it. Now, as the Greeks came into contact with people from Persia and India, Their interest in the old gods declined. Partly because, now, folk, you might think this belongs to one of theology class. I want to say this about the oracles. The oracles, after a while, quit talking to them. Quit communicating. Now, if it had all been fakery, well, they could have continued the fakery. But, nevertheless, again, you can believe what you want to. The gods seem to be less and less powerful, less and less interested in them, and it almost seemed like the gods had gone off somewhere and would never come back. No longer cared about, no longer, and it's like they no longer, no longer interacted with them. Like the gods had once during the Trojan War been right there to help them fight against Troy, often visited them, cohabited with their women, and all of a sudden these gods were gone. Again, each of you can decide for yourself why or how that happened. But something I also must about the oracles. The woman they used was what they called the best woman they could find in the community. She had to be about middle age, she had to be married, and had grown children, that they believed that a married woman best pleased the goddess Apollo. And a woman who had children who walked and behaved orderly, and a woman who was known to be faithful to her husband. This was their picture of an ideal woman. Again, I'm not questioning what they called an ideal woman, but again, they would look around the community and see who's the best woman we know of, a woman who was known to be somewhat fearless and not a troublemaker, a calm, self-respecting woman. And they would make her the priestess to Apollo. Again, I'm not questioning the pigs. But eventually, like I say, now,